There we go.
Ready to begin?
Ready?
Good morning. Morning, Stephen. I owe you a phone call, so I apologize for not having a call back. I want to thank Stephen Jacobson for inviting me again. It's always a pleasure to be here. It's a little bit worrying that I first started coming to United when I was coming to these morning sessions, and I've subsequently been attending Mincha Ramara quite regularly, so regularly that they're in fact asking me if I should join up. Certainly that's it's a trick maybe I have to think about it. Obviously, with the situation in Eretz Yisrael, I would ask that our learning, we will learn something to bring some merits and close and serve as protection for the Jewish people. And Bezrat Hashem, we will hear some good news very soon. Now, I think while Israel, as we know, is engaged in war, we in Chutz La'aretz and diaspora are also facing, unfortunately, ugly displays of anti-Semitism and hatred. Rabbi Nachman always taught that all the world is a very narrow bridge. It's always precarious. The essential thing, he said, is not to be afraid at all. And we should stay strong, confident, and hopeful that righteousness will prevail over evil and that we will have shalom for Israel and all the world. And of course, as we know, we're learning, we're davening, we're saying everything we're saying to Him for the soldiers, for the people who are in captivity, people who are suffering, but we also have to learn. We learn from the beginning of the Pasha the importance of Chesed, that Abraham interrupted his conversation with Hashem, do an act of Chesed, do an act of hospitality, and we should also, over these weeks, increase our Chesed, increase our Ahavas Yisrael, because that way we can do something ourselves, we can actually have an influence. My learned colleague made a comment about the Chumash that I have in front of me. I have to confess that relevant person's not here, but I've noticed that the printing in Sidurim and Chumash seems to have shrunk. I think it's something to do with inflation, but everything seems to be a little bit smaller now than it used to be. But this Chumash I can actually read with some comfort. I don't know why they're printing things so small these days. Certainly, the Siddur that I used to use in Shul has shrunk. I used to use Arinat Yisrael, and I can't even read it anymore so much. Must have washed it somewhere, but I don't know. But I want to talk a little bit about something in Chumash today. The Satmar Rebbe, Rabbi Yol, towards the end of his life, only used to learn Chumash. He gave up with Gemara, he gave up with anything else. He said, because everything is in Chumash. And I think that sometimes when we learn Chumash, we don't realize the significance of every single letter. Every single letter is important, and sometimes we get caught by the big pictures, we forget the little details, but they all fit in incredibly importantly and give us all a lesson to learn. And I think we also frequently focus on the main characters. We talk about Avraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov. We don't always talk about the supporting cast. So this morning, I just want to spend a few minutes talking about one member of the supporting cast and a lesson that we can, I think, learn and take away into our lives from him. And the character, of course, is Lot. And if you actually go through Chumash, one of the most disturbing episodes in the whole Torah happens immediately before the destruction of Sodom. As we know, two of the three angels who visited Abraham now arrive at his nephew's doorstep in Sodom. Lot gives them hospitality, he invites them in to the protection of his home, but it doesn't take very long before the people in the city learn that there are visitors in the city, and they surround Lot's house, demanding that the strangers are giving up to them. Now, trying to protect, as we know, these visitors from the danger that's confronting them, Lot tries to reason with the mob. And what does he do? He offers the mob his two unmarried daughters. Now, the people of Sodom reject the offer and prepare to storm his house. And of course, as you know, they afflict their attackers as they blind them and then inform Lot of the whole idea to protect him and his family. But how on earth are we to understand Lot's behavior? He welcomes strangers in his home, but then is willing to sacrifice his daughters to mob violence. If he give his daughters to a mob, who knows what they would do to them? And how on earth do we learn something about Lot's personality, his soul? What does this whole episode tell us? I think with the story of Lot, we're actually confronted with one of those situations in the Torah where a simple reading of the text reveals some early missignificance. And I think we have to look at what happens to Lot and look at some very crucial wording, which will tell us so much to explain what happened to Lot and how he reached the point where he was prepared to offer his daughters to the mob. I'd like to begin the story here, go back a little bit to Lot's situation in Lech Lecha, where he parted with Avraham. We know that there was a dispute between the shepherds of Avraham and the shepherds of Lot, and Avraham suggested that we'll part ways, separate yourself, and they decide that, as Avraham says, if you go to the right, I'll go to the left. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. Given the opportunity to go absolutely anywhere in the land of Canaan, what does Lot do? He chooses the fertile valley of the Jordan, and we're told in the Torah amazing words. It's things we don't really think about. It tells us, "Ve'echel ad Sodom." Ve'echel. What does that mean? Lots of people say, and indeed here it says, he pitched his tent ad Sodom, as far as Sodom. Now, I'd actually like to use that word slightly differently. Ve'echel pitched his tent. I'd say he tented. He made it a very, very temporary dwelling. And I think that explains something about his relationship to Sodom. Normally, when you talk about where you're going to live, there are two words that we use in the Torah. We use shevet, to live, or lagur, to dwell. And lagur is talking about dwelling, we're talking about a temporary. But Rashi, or the Torah here, uses something different. It says, in effect, tented, he pitched his tent. Now, I think that is even more temporary than dwelling. And then we have the word ad, until Sodom. That again seems to be an ambiguous, strange word. The Rabbanim tell us that the word ad is one of two things, depending on context, as we know. Sometimes it means up to and including. Sometimes it means up to but not including. So if we're talking about ad 40 amas, we're going up to exactly what it means. Is an object 40 amot high acceptable? Or does it mean it's got to be 39.99999 amot recurring? How high can we go? And I think by using the word ad Sodom, saying that the Torah is telling us something important. Is Lot in the city or outside the city? Where does he go? And the facts are totally unclear. We're not told. Is he at the edge of the city? And I think what the Torah is saying is there's some ambivalence on the part of Lot. He doesn't know where his relationship is going to be with the city. We're then told immediately afterwards that the people of Sodom are incredibly wicked and evil towards Hashem. Now, Lot knew what the city was like, and he consciously decides to put his tent at the border. He's almost got 1 foot in the city and 1 foot outside. He thinks he can actually live on the edge of the city without it influencing him. Next time we actually find Lot, what happens? We read about it last week. He's taken captive during a war in Sodom. And the Torah says they took Lot and all his wealth, the son of Avram's brother, and they went to Yoshev the Sodom. And he was living in Sodom. Right. Why not we have this phrase in the Torah? What does it add? Yoshev the Sodom, and he was living in Sodom. But it's actually telling us something very important. Lot's no longer on the edge of the city. He's moved inside. He's suddenly in the city. Originally, he was ambivalent about his relationship with these people. Now he is in there. He's comfortable. He's living within the borders of the city. And then what happens? We meet Lot again in this week's parasha, And the Torah introduces this whole event again in an interesting way. It says, V'lot Yeshev b'sha'ar Sodom. He was sitting in the gates of Sodom. And that's a very significant single letter that's telling us a lot. Living at the gates of Sodom. Which people sit in the gates of Sodom? Which people sit in the gates of a city? The important people. In fact, Rashi tells us that he'd suddenly become the chief judge. He was a man treated with respect. He was literally the leader of Sodom. You have to be very important in those times to sit in the gate. Remember Megillat Ruth. Remember Boaz, who was sitting in the gates. It's the important place to be with the Choshev people. Lot was a respected elder in the city. Now, if you actually look at these words, we realize what has happened to Lot. He's gone from the edge, to the side, to actually being a leader. The Torah is actually saying it, that he's actually suddenly reached a stage that we can understand his behavior to the mob. Yes, he's still got some of Avraham in him, but he's also got a lot of Sodom. He's inherited a lot. He's taken it on deliberately. I think Lot, much maligned, is not evil. I don't think he's an evil man. We know that he's the ancestor of David HaMelech. I think where Lot falls down is he was a weak man. I think his fatal flaw was that he didn't recognize his own vulnerability. He thought that he could withstand the temptations of Sodom. Without realizing, he sucked in and transformed by Sodom to the point that he actually offered his daughters up. And I think what the Torah is telling us is you can't live near Sodom and remain unchanged. Okay? And maybe that's what we have to think about ourselves. At this most important juncture in his life, Lot displays the behavior of someone who's trying to, in effect, reconcile the irreconcilable. On the one hand, he wants to hold on to the traditions that he witnessed from Abraham, hospitality. He saw that. He welcomes guests, he treats them royally, he protects them. But at the same time, he crosses over into the terrible world of Sodom and offers to sacrifice his daughters to a brutal fate. Lot fails because he thinks that he can live in two worlds at once, two worlds that can't coexist. And we'll see over the course of a few chapters how Lot is transformed from a potential tzaddik into someone who takes that journey into Sodom. Now, I'm not suggesting our lesson from this should be that we shut ourselves away in ghettos. That's not what we should be doing. You actually think about Avraham. He invited the world in. He didn't close his tents down and give his children private lessons in monotheism. He didn't say, I support Hashem, but I'm going to close everything down. He actually went out into the world. But that's because he was confident. He asked what he could do to change the world for Hashem. His whole motivation was working for God. He learned, he studied, he spread his hospitality around. Lot didn't have his uncles and aunts. He didn't have the same character. He didn't have the same commitment. He didn't have the same knowledge. And I think Lot's lesson is a cautionary tale for all of us. We have to realize the effects of our external environment on our lives. We have to be aware of the world that surrounds us. And we have to actively reject those elements surrounding us that are incompatible with our own standards. We have to be in the world, but we have to be separate from it in our own way. And only if we actually have vigilance can we escape Lot's fate of being something. Please God, we will be safe, we will be well. And by this time next week, we'll have some very good things.
Questions? No, okay. Well, in that case, I will say goodbye to those of you on Zoom, and then I'll say the bracha acharona. Oh, there's a question. Sorry, there's a question.
you know, if we actually follow, if we look through, and yes, we are seeing things and we're seeing the repeated things. We're told in Kurdish, we're told everywhere else, things are repeating themselves. Things we've not paid attention. We've not learned the lessons of the past. And unfortunately, I've been saying for a number of years now, and I'm going to repeat it again. Number one, we have not shown sufficient appreciation for the fact that we have Eretz Yisrael. Each and every one of us, we accept it maybe as a holiday destination, maybe as a place for a second house. We do not show, as a Kehillah, generally enough appreciation for the gift that we have been given of Eretz Yisrael. That was a miracle. But why are we all here on Yom Ha'atzmaut, on Yom Yerushalayim, saying thank you, saying Hallel? I think it's incredibly important. We have to show appreciation for Eretz Yisrael. Otherwise, Chas v'Shalom, the worst thing will happen. And the other thing is, we've seen in the destruction of the Bottom, we haven't loved one another anymore. Everyone we've got to love. Everyone as a Jew, we should be loving them actively, not just thinking, I tolerate them. We show respect, but show them love. It's more than that. We've got to love every one of us. And until we do that, we've seen it happen before. And it's not something I'm saying now. You can listen to my shiurim over the last 5 years. I've been saying the same thing. And it's incredibly important that we love every other single Jew, whatever they have on their head, or even if they don't have anything on their head, whatever they've got, we have to welcome them and say they're part of them. And that's why I actually love this shul. Because I think this shul is actually an example where you do have everyone in, across the board, and that's what we should be doing throughout the Kehillah. We should be uniting, and only that way we actually.
Oh, that's our message there. Thank you very much again. I will say goodbye to those on Zoom and then do the bracha achrona.